Hello, everybody. We're back with Mr. David Amerland, the author of one of the 10 awesome books he wrote called SEO Help. Hello, David.
Hello, how are you?
Pretty good, thank you. Pretty good. So, David, for those that don't know, actually, I don't think they exist on the planet anymore. Anybody who doesn't know David, but David is the author of the book SEO Help, which is what we're talking about today, and the book discusses how you can use various approaches that you should use to be able to get SEO in place. SEO, of course, is search engine optimization, so people can find your web pages easier, so you can be positioned better in terms of where Google shows you in its results for search. And obviously, that's what everybody wants, and that's what everybody's trying to get. But in terms of how to do it, that's kind of an elusive, moving target all the time. And that's why books like SEO Help are a huge help in finding out exactly what steps people can take to make sure that they have the SEO taken care of. And you can get the book if you don't have it at davidamerland.com, amazon.com, barnesandnoble.com. Basically, everywhere where good books are sold, you can find this book. And David is right now in the process of releasing a new book, but it won't be out for a bit, but he's done writing it. So we're going to kind of get David's mind back from the new book into the old book. And today we're going to be discussing images. And so I'm going to let David do his introduction here in terms of the importance of images and SEO, and then we're going to get into the details of it. David?
Oleg, yes, thank you very much for the introduction. And you're absolutely right. We're covering images. It's incredibly important. And usually there are two questions associated with this. The first one is, what kind of images do I need to have for my website or any kind of marketing effort which I use? And the second question is, how do I optimize them? What does that even mean? To understand the difference, let's take one small step back, and that small step in terms of time is about 4 or 5 years. 4 or 5 years ago, if we had any kind of image associated with any kind of text, it was there simply to break the text up, to pretty it up, to create a slightly more visually appealing kind of approach or composition, and that was about it. It was important, but in terms of SEO, it was not absolutely critical, although there were a few elements that we had to play with. This is not the case anymore. An image is an integral part of who you are in terms of your visual identity. It is also part of who you are in terms of your digital identity. It is an incredibly important part of who you are in terms of how that image impacts emotionally and appeals to your audience. And usually here, the classic example to think of in 2 words is Coca-Cola. And if you look at any Coca-Cola sort of sign, even if it's like 3/4 covered or half of it is covered, instantly it becomes identifiable. And the moment it becomes identifiable, we have an emotional response to that. What do we think normally? We don't think the drink, we think happiness, usually. We think good times, we think Christmas, we think red trucks going across, that kind of thing. Now,
Cool bears.
Yeah, absolutely. And it has taken an enormous amount of work for Coca-Cola to actually have that kind of resonance in its audience, and it's a huge win for it. So the question here really becomes, how do we translate this in terms of search engine optimization? What is the kind of thinking that we need to put in place? What are the kind of choices that we need to put in place? Normally when I give presentations, I say that, these days when you actually put anything up on the web, you are wearing many hats. You're a publisher, you're an editor, you're a writer, you're a photographer, you are a brand marketer, you're even an artist in many ways. Ultimately, if you don't have all those skill sets, or if it becomes a daunting task, you really just have to be you. You need to think, what do I need to have in place to make whatever I'm creating in terms of text or in terms of branding or in terms of whatever you're creating, even if it's just a website presence, what do I need to have to make it appealing? What do I have to do to make it resonate with the audience? What would I like to see if I was in their shoes? And this is a critical shift, if you like. because we need to approach it from the mindset of the audience rather than what we want to put in place, and see how they would find it useful as opposed to what we may want to call pretty. And that is a very critical transition, if you like, in the thinking. So let's get down to the nitty-gritty. Let's get on to practical things. What do we need to do in order to optimize any kind of image? First of all, the question is, do we need images? The answer is yes. Do we need any kind of image? No. We need images which are relevant to what we're actually promoting in terms of text or in terms of branding. Do those images just need to be tangentially linked to what we're actually promoting? The answer is no. They have to be integrally linked. They have to be part of this overall thematic approach. They have to be part of the concept of what we're actually doing. Why? Because images are themselves a narrative. They tell a story. And the old cliche of an image is worth 1,000 words. Well, now it actually becomes really true, not just in terms of the audience, but also in terms of how search engines see an image, because search engines are actually beginning to see the elements of an image, take it apart, determine what it is, and that gives us an extra layer or several layers of potential visibility on the web, which we need to take advantage of. Delayer all those things, break it all down, and Oleg will come in with questions, etc. in a minute. Now, and what do we need? Okay, let's start from the absolute basics. First of all, the image has to be optimized for speed. A lot of the images, a lot of the content are consumed on mobile devices. Mobile devices have narrow bandwidth to deal with normally. Any half-second wait that the audience has to wait for can cost us anything between 25 and 30% of the visitors. So an image that takes 3 seconds is essentially a dead page. Nobody will see it. So they need to be light. So they need to be optimized for speed. The second thing is we need to have done our homework in terms of how we actually name them. So you actually upload an image on the web. Well, if the image is, I don't know, digital pixel 1056-13, that means nothing. So they need to have a name. So you need to have a file name that basically reflects that. Then when you upload it, make sure your alt tags are right. So you have the alt text which search engines read in terms of a picture, and you have to be descriptive there. So if the picture is dancing bear in the woods, you actually put dancing bear in the woods, for instance. And then when you have done all those things, it's a pretty basic. Then you got to think, what are the elements in the picture? What does the picture actually tell in terms of the story? And perhaps even you should start from that to begin with, but that's actually quite rarefied. So this is the new thing which we're actually doing now. Now, Google has the ability to look at the elements of a picture. It can now determine, to some extent, context. It can certainly determine entities, which are discrete objects represented in the picture. And because it can determine context, it can also determine the importance of those elements. So if you have a picture of a beach, and that beach shows a beach ball, which is pretty central, that beach ball can actually come up in terms of somebody doing searches for beach balls. So the picture can actually come up, even though the picture may be beach as opposed to beach balls. Now, why do I mention this? Because essentially the way you pick images now has to be linked very specifically to the storyline or the narrative they're creating in terms of your brand values, and specific content you're actually delivering. So I'm going to stop here, and we're going to start unpacking some of these things into more details in a minute.
Excellent, excellent. Because I was going to say, David, again, in 10 minutes, he covered the entire spectrum. And this is why the man gets paid $50,000 an hour, just so you folks know. If you want to hire him, that's exactly why. But seriously, let's get back to a little bit more detail. David kind of went pretty quickly over a lot of different things, so we're going to break it up a little bit and start from a little bit simpler. And then everything, obviously, that was said was exactly right on the money. But if you look at it in terms of approach, like David said, 1,000, one image is worth 1,000 words. It's one of these situations where you're trying to create some sort of a feeling in the person you're trying to relay the information to. And the feeling is easily created. If you look at our last HOA, you saw that I had this really cool blue computer background with this screen, keyboard, and space and all that. It would look really, really cool. Now look behind me, you can see it looks like an old green drape is basically what it looks like. Doesn't look very appealing, right? And that's intentionally so. Forget about the fact that the software isn't working today, but that's a separate story. It's actually intentionally so because it makes a point. it makes a point when you look at something like this, it's not very attractive, meaning it's also not very appealing. Okay, and if it's not, you're trying to get as attractive, as appealing to your audience on the web as you can. And certainly writing words has a lot to do with it, because you can, there's authors that can totally, in some cases, move people to tears if they do it right, right? So you can definitely do magic with words. But at the same time, images, the way we are, we're very visual people. I mean, the humans are. And so we're used to looking at images. We don't go outside and say, well, this is such a beautiful word. No, we say this is such a beautiful tree, or these are beautiful clouds, or this is such an incredible looking color leaf, things like that. And so with that being the case, we're definitely into images. We're also much more into, even beyond that, into moving images, which explains why TV is the most popular medium out there for people to kill their time with, because they like moving images. I mean, we like moving images. That's why things like animation, things like that are very important. That's why Google incorporated that into their material design, because these are the things people like. So they're trying to bring to what people like to the forefront. So if you go back to the images themselves, the idea is to create imagery that would be congruent with your message. It doesn't make any sense to do some sort of a post for a doctor's office and show a picture of a broken bicycle. I mean, that's definitely not going to fly. It's going to, in some cases, it actually would work if the message that you're trying to convey about things being broken and unusable unless they're fixed, if you kind of have the narrative going in that direction, maybe it would have something to do with it. Also, a lot of times what you do with images is you're trying to go for shock. In other words, you're trying to put something out there that just people just go, wow, I mean, what is this? And so that, of course, that shock, you see also a lot of that kind of stuff you see in advertising. People do funny stuff, people do shocking stuff, specifically because the mind just immediately reacts like it's not used to it, it's not expecting something like this. So once it's not expecting it, it puts more effort into trying to understand it, which means it remembers it better. So some people do the shock situation specifically for the purposes of having better recollection of people who are looking at it. So there's many different ways to approach how you use imagery. And, like some people, it just depends on the person. Some people like vivid colors. Some people like pastel colors. I myself is a huge fan of, a lot of vivid colors. So a lot of pictures that I personally take and post, you can see there's a lot of separation in colors. Specifically, greens are much, much more vivid than normally they would be, and then browns are much more vivid too. So it really kind of jumps in your face. I even have a collection on my photos called Sky Candy, kind of like the play on words for eye candy. The reason being is because you look at some of these images of the sky, it's like immediate reaction for most people is wow, because of the way it shows. So the idea there is to just try to put something out there to the person that's going to be viewing it, for them to remember it and for them to make it appealing. And that's where you kind of, how you approach the getting of the picture. Because a lot of times you take photos of people. It doesn't have to be, leaves or sky. It could be people. And so what can you do with people? A lot of things, things like if somebody looks at you, with a, face like they just came off from concentration camp or something, it's one thing. It's totally different when somebody looks at you with a big smile. If you look at, for example, most of David's stuff, most of the time you see him smiling, partially because of my jokes, but mostly he's just, you can say he's a happy person. You can see the kindness and the way he's actually is, from all this time I've now gotten to know David, you can see this reflected in his face. And so when you look at him, you get a certain feel. Forget about what he says, even if you completely forget about that. And sorry, David, to use you as a guinea pig, but it works really well for what I'm trying to say here. But it really is driving point home about that person. When you look at the picture and has a nice smile on, things like that, it makes a whole huge difference in how you perceive that person. Okay? And I realize I should smile more, but I don't, but that's a separate story. But seriously though, it definitely makes a huge difference in terms of picking the photos you pick. And before going too much further here, I just want to start by going back to the image acquisition itself. We talked a little bit about what kind of photos you should be looking at. And of course, we can't tell you, We just can give you some guidelines. You're the one who needs to figure out, based on your content, based on your audience, based on what you're trying to portray, what kind of photos you should get. So then you get into the concept, okay, I don't take photos. I don't know how to take a good photo. How do I get the photos? And so, there's plenty of services out there that allow you to go in and purchase or get for free photos. And if you join the Google Space for this particular HOA, then I'll make a post in there that has a bunch of different services that give you free imagery. So you can go get clip art, you can go get photos, you can get a lot of that stuff online, totally legitimate. You don't have to pay any fees for it or anything like that. There's a lot of that stuff available. And of course, there's also what they call stock photography and videos, which allow you to buy higher quality photos most of the time. That they have a plenty of variety of what you can pick. So getting images these days is not that difficult. Is the job of getting the right images to get the message across correctly, as David pointed out earlier. That's the key that you should be thinking about. The other stuff is not that difficult. And so I'll let David continue here, and then when we get back, maybe we can talk a little bit about the kind of minutia and details of images specifically for the issue.
Oleg, that's great, and thank you very much for bringing up two very important things. Okay, the first one is you mentioned the shock value of images which are contrasting, and here there's always a conundrum. Essentially, the moment we start talking about search engine optimization on the web, and we really started talking about it in terms of writing first, what went was what we usually prize the most, which is that playfulness in terms of creativity that we as humans tend to put together. So, Oleg mentioned a very juxtaposed kind of contrasting image where you have a dentist's practice and a broken down bicycle. And while we as humans perhaps would find that very interesting and we could create the kind of elements that would mesh sufficiently to draw attention to something, these days it tends to fly in the face of logic in terms of search engine optimization and how search engines, which despite their smarts are still very literal, would actually see this. So the first piece of advice is you need to be very careful about doing this kind of thing. Certainly there's a trade-off every time. If you have a very devoted and large audience that are used to that approach, then by all means you sort of cater to them first and then do search engines later. But if you're building up a business and you think, well, I'm going to be clever with my titles and I'm going to be clever with my images, well, here you're probably missing an opportunity to gain greater visibility when it comes to search, and you might possibly be shooting yourself in the foot. So you need to think, are my titles reflective of my values? Are my titles reflective of my brand? Are my titles, when I create content, reflective of the needs of my audience? And then you have to transfer exactly the same kind of thinking to your image creation or picture selection. So you've got to be very careful here. The second thing is, and Oleg brought it up, and again, I'm grateful for that. Do you go stock images? Do you create your own? What do you do? Do you go to an online agency and pay and get some images which are going to stick into your website? Are you going to have, for instance, all those clever, forever young, smiling people in colorful sweaters that we're accustomed to in terms of marketplace? And we know it's not real. Or are you going to become a little bit more real and shoot your own, especially if you don't feel qualified to do that, if you don't know how to compose things properly, if you don't know how to actually set out a beautiful picture to do that? It's a difficult one, admittedly, but it's not an impossible thing to actually reply to. So let's see how I usually tackle this when it comes to corporate settings or small business settings. Well, I say by all means, use generic images if it's warranted in terms of the content, and you can create a very beautiful composition which actually feeds into it, and the picture itself is part of the narrative, and that actually is a perfect fit. So yes, do that. But if it comes to very specific aspects of your business, whether it's the products you're selling or the services you're actually selling or the layout or anything like that, nothing beats quite an authentic picture. And here you don't have to be a fantastic photographer. You don't have to create magical compositions. You don't have to sort of have beautiful settings and perfect lighting, as long as the picture is authentic. Because what do authentic pictures have? Well, if it's a subject or an object, well, immediate value because we can see something. So, you know, if it's how something is done, how a recipe is put together, I really want to see how the ingredients fall together, etc. Or if it's a marketplace or if it's a working place, well, I want to see real people. I want to see people actually working at their desks or doing something and being engaged and engaging me in return. And that again becomes part of the narrative, becomes part of the authenticity. It becomes a lot easier proposition in terms of what you're actually putting together. So these are the choices always. I always say you err on the side of realness whenever you can. When you can't, don't fake it, but do buy stock images in order to create the kind of narrative you want in something other than just the core of your business. If the core of your business is fake, with a small f, because you couldn't be bothered, you just couldn't put it together, perhaps you're not ready to do so, well, you're only creating problems for yourself because you don't create anything which is identifiable as you. I mean, imagine if, you know, if we go back to my famous example of Coca-Cola, Coca-Cola was using instead, I don't know, Schweppes soda water. It wouldn't be the same thing, right? And it just painted it red. It just wouldn't work.
All right.
Speaking, yep, I was going to say some interesting selections you have there, especially with coming Halloween.
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to make a couple of points here. So let me jump out from David and show you a few things here. So, you know, one of the things that I wanted to mention is that, you know, you can take a lot of photos yourself, and I'm showing you some of my photos. So here's an example. There was a contest, and somebody just won some kind of image deal. I don't even remember the details. I just came across it in my news read, and I thought it was a really cool image. Okay, so I just used the regular graphics editing program, which, you know, anybody can get access to. It's not that difficult. And I thought it'd be really cool to use as a poster child for our prior HOA with David. And so I took this, which is something somebody created. Okay, and then from there I made a few embellishments to it and made it look like this. And so you can see I put a couple of photos there, put some images, I mean some logos and stuff, and you have a cool looking deal. And you know, I cannot create stuff like that, but obviously I put it together using somebody else. So that's the thing I wanted to emphasize is you can go and do a lot of things on your own. Here's another example. I bought this little device here from Amazon, which, by the way, I highly recommend. Phenomenal little piece of hardware and software for my son's birthday. And so I just simply took a picture of the box on one side, and actually it may have come from an email that they sent me, one of the two. And I got the image, cropped it out a little bit, and there we go. And it became part of one of my posts that I did on Google+. So you can use some of the existing things like this. You can take, and speaking of your own pictures, if you look at that, for example, I got a gift the other day from a very, very nice gentleman, and it came in a box, you know, from Amazon that looked like this. So I just, you know, stuck my thumbs up into it and took a picture, and, you know, used another program to, this is Prisma, doing a little filtering, and you have an example of something that you can actually post, and it makes a point about, you know, instead of showing some weird looking blue thumbs up deal, you can put something that looks like this, which is a lot more appealing in my view, to make a point about people indicating that you like it, or you want them to click on like or things like that. So there's a lot of that stuff you can do on your own. Here's another example. I want to do a post. You know, I got the official voting ballot yesterday, and so I just simply cropped it out, and I wanted to make a post about the importance of people voting. And, you know, right there it says official ballot vote exclamation point. I mean, I couldn't come up with anything better myself than this. This is perfect, exactly what I want. Came in the mail. You take a picture, you crop it, you know, getting rid of stuff that you don't want to be visible to other people, and it's a done deal. And now you have some image that's unique, and at the same time something you can use for somebody else. So the point being that there's really a lot of different places you can go to add to get stock photography from, where you can purchase it, you can get a lot of free stuff, and you can just go out and shoot your own stuff. You know, if you look outside, you can find all kinds of things that would be, and this way you don't have to worry about copyrights. One of the things that you know, we haven't touched on yet, but it's very important, is that a lot of people out there are very, very serious about their trademarks. If you want to use David Amerland's example, if you're going to go and grab Coca-Cola logo, and if you're going to slap it in one of your products or something and try to sell it, and saying that, you know, buy my glasses, people usually drink Coke with it, Coke is going to have you in court before you can even put it anywhere in the stores. Okay, it's not, they All these companies like Disney, like Coca-Cola, all the big companies, they're very, very adamant about and diligent about making sure that their copyrights are not misused. And when I say misused, it doesn't matter what your intentions are. If you don't have a license to use their logo and to use their imagery, you're not allowed to use it, period. It's just exactly how it works. So from that standpoint, it makes a lot of sense to take your own photography, because whatever pictures you take yourself, they're yours. Nobody can come after you. Nobody can say anything. That does not mean you can go and shoot a picture of Coca-Cola bottle, you know, with their logo and everything else. Sorry about that. And you know, use that. They're still going to go after you. But typically speaking, if you take pictures out there of just about anything, you can use them, and they will be perfectly useful for, you know, any kind of content you create. And you need a lot of pictures, a lot of images for a lot of content, because the basic idea is you need to be using images for just about everything you post. You do not typically post anything without having some sort of image or video to go with it. So you need to come up with a lot of imagery. Where do you come up with that? And that's where, you know, because of such a need, if you're putting things on Instagram, which of course is nothing but images, you're putting it on Twitter, you want to add an image, you're putting in Google Plus, you know, you're creating blogs, whatever you're doing, you need imagery everywhere. And it doesn't make much sense to use exactly the same image if people are going to follow you in different outlets, you know, on Google Plus, on Twitter, on Facebook. Sure, you can cross-post the same image to all three places, but people who follow you, if they see, they're not going to follow you everywhere if they see you're posting essentially the same stuff. And so the idea is to try to mix it up a little bit, and that's where, you know, it comes in where you really need to do a lot of image acquisition, and using these techniques, like I said, your own images, you know, scanning something that came in the mail, you know, all kinds of different, you can get easily, you don't need to be very creative to do this. You can get tremendous amount of images. You got people like, you know, Gina Fidel, who is an amazing artist in terms of some of the paintings she can create. Most of us don't have anywhere near the talent to be able to do what she does. You know, I know I certainly don't, and my guess is David doesn't either. And
You're absolutely right.
Yeah, exactly.
No,
And so very few people actually have, you know, talent like she has to be able to create your own imagery. But luckily we have, you know, we're living in the mobile age with very decent cameras, and we can go out there and take any images we want, and we can use them in our posts. And using some of the even rudimentary software, you can easily make some embellishments, like you take a Prisma shot, for example, a Prisma, which is a free program you can get for your mobile device, both on iOS and on Android, and you just apply, you know, few of their filters and look what it looks like. And if it's something you like, now you have something that's kind of unique, different. It's from your own photo. You don't have to worry about copyrights, and away you go. So now I think we pretty much covered the image acquisition, David. Why don't we talk about the details of some of the details about specifically what to look for in terms of SEO when it comes to, I mean, you touched on it a little bit about, you know, alt tag and everything else. Let's go a little more detail about that.
Okay, I mean, so let's look at the practicalities of this now. And there are two layers to this. The first one is what we do on the page once we have an image, and this is the simplest part of it. We have an image we're going to put on the page. What do we do exactly? Well, here's what we need to do. And we already discussed that the image has to be light, so it needs to be optimized for fast loading. It needs to be optimized for the width and content of your website. So you need to make sure the dimensions are right. If you can, you know, optimize it for color so it's visually appealing. And then you need to make sure that basically the alt tag, which is a description of the picture, which search engines see. And usually, you know, if you mouse over a picture on a web page, the alt tag pops up, not always, but you will see it there. And that's exactly what it is. Now, that tells a search engine what a picture is. And in the past, you know, in the bad old days of SEO, we used to lie about these things and sort of keyword load these images and try to make a search engine think that they're relevant when they weren't, because it worked. Now it doesn't. The picture has to be very descriptive. So make sure the description of your picture is very accurate. Make sure the description of your picture basically describes the picture. So don't just put a picture which goes with my article. That means nothing. Don't put down a generic description like picture of a beach, because that also means nothing. But if you have, for instance, you know, a volleyball scene from Olympics 2016, for instance, describe that exactly. So that picture is there. Describe the themes if possible. So that goes on the alt tag, and it has to be there. Then there's naming the file, because that's also important. So when you actually name the file, don't just name them picture 1, picture 2, picture 3, because they need to go on your website. I see frequently corporate websites where they have pictures labeled, some code number and picture large, picture small, picture medium, picture thumbnail. I mean, that's ridiculous. Okay, it helps the designers do that, but it doesn't help search engines. It doesn't help in terms of your search. These are the absolute basic things which you need to do when you actually load those things on your website. What else do you need to do? Here's the other thing which you need to do. When you actually have the picture, deconstruct it. Think, does this picture have all the elements which are needed in order to tell a narrative, which tells a story, which will help the theme of my content, the branding of my site, the branding of my images, of my business? Does it reflect the values which I absolutely want to promote? And when we talk about values, I mean, you've got to think, what do you stand for? Are you a business that is perhaps really serious and rigorous and does things in a certain way? Well, then you can't have any funny pictures, because that sort of detracts a little bit from your image. Are you the kind of business that's actually very user friendly and very customer centric and very sort of playful? I mean, think of Virgin, for instance. Most of their websites have a very playful feel to them, and that's reflected in the pictures, it's reflected in the colors, it's reflected in the team shots they take. Sometimes it's even reflected in the fonts that they use. Search engines are very good at actually analyzing the different elements which are in a picture. Well, that's very true. So if you actually have a picture itself, a search engine will look at it, they will determine, and by search engine I mean Google in particular, it will determine the context, it will determine all the elements within it, it will identify specific entities, and the value of doing all this is that suddenly your picture will allow your website to come up on Google's image search independently of the content, and a lot of the times independently of any search queries which you might have optimized it for intentionally. So if you have a variety of pictures and they all feed into your brand values, if they feed into your overall theme in terms of what you do, how you do it, in terms of your digital identity, in terms of the identity of your business, what you are essentially doing is just search engine optimizing your pictorial content. That's what you're doing. Is this difficult to do? Well, the way I just described it, if you have never done it before, absolutely it is, because it requires that change in mindset. But if you are accustomed to thinking of your business as something which presents a particular picture to the world, which you absolutely stand for, then it's not so difficult. It becomes a challenge of, okay, here I've got this content, or here I've got this intent, or here I've got this campaign. How do I visually represent it? And that's where you can become creative. And by creative, I don't mean being an artist. Just be experimental. Try different things and see how they click.
Exactly. And basically, what I wanted to talk about. Let me just show you the screen to talk a little bit. Show you a specific example here that David was talking about. So as you can see, you don't need to be a programmer, but just if you have a basic understanding of this, it'll be helpful for you. This is what an image tag, as they call it, looks like in HTML. Right there. Mm-hmm. You basically, it's just one small command like this. Okay, it's not much to it, and it starts with this IMG and that. So the parameters or attributes, as they call it, you specify are the name of the file, and that's what David was talking about. That the name that goes into this SRC between the double quotes. That's one of the things that Google is looking at to try to figure out what the heck is this image all about. So this is where you can get. You can say smiley, or you can say X, or you can say 1, 2, 3, which means nothing to Google. But if you really put a longer name, and you can separate the name by underscores, you can separate it by dashes, however you want to do it, it all helps Google to determine what exactly this image is supposed to mean to them in terms of trying to index it. In addition to that, you have this ALT, or alternate text tag, not tag but attribute, and that specifies more information. So you can have a totally different, or hopefully related, content that you have here compared to what the actual file name is. Because you're not going to say long big sentences in all your file names. You can say a few keywords, but not go tremendously. But in this alt tag, you can expand on that, because that's something that nobody's going to see typically. Typically, when people look, they see the image, they don't see this text. If for some reason the images are not being able to be displayed, which is initially when you pull a page up, it tries to display it, but if it can't for some reason, it will show this tag. And also people actually have ability in their browsers to turn off automatic display of imagery, so it loads faster. And so with that, if that option is turned on, then the only thing will show up is this particular piece of text. The layout may look weird because of all this text in there, but at least the words will be there, so people have some idea, number one. And number two, even more importantly, because most of us now have fast connections, we don't need to worry about that. But the search engine is definitely going to look at this alt tag attribute to determine how to index and what to do with in terms of indexing. And then you have the height and width of the image itself that helps the browser to load things a little bit faster, because otherwise they need to figure out, the browser needs to figure out what the height and width would be, and so it takes it a little bit longer. This way, if you specify it specifically, then they know what it is and they show it specifically in that size, even if that size is not exactly the same as the image. So for example, I could have an 84 by 84 image, and I'm saying 42 by 42, which will show the same image, but it's going to show it in half the size that it actually is in real life. That's not something I recommend. If you need to make images smaller, don't use these attributes to make them bigger and smaller. Just actually create the right size, because that would be the fastest loading time. And when we're talking about SEO, loading time is a huge, huge factor right now. And we talked last time a little bit about AMP pages and their importance because they load so fast. And partially they load so fast because they have a bunch of things optimized, including images. And now with what they call responsive websites or responsive web pages, those allow you to automatically indicate several images. So depending on the resolution of device that's being used to show a particular web page or website, that will determine which of these images, it's the same image, just different resolutions, different sizes. It will determine which one it's going to use. And the difference is huge in terms of time, because it can load, obviously, if it's a small screen phone, a small screen size on the phone, then you don't have to load a huge image. You can load a much smaller version of that image. And if you have it available, obviously it will load that much. It's a lot faster to take and load a small image than to take a huge image and they show it to me on a small screen. You see, because it still needs to load the entire thing. So having multiple images, same images, is definitely a big plus when you're trying to create responsive type websites. But that's getting a little bit more complicated, a little bit more into the development category. As a minimum, what you should know is that when you look at some of the code, if you're looking at it, these are the main things you need to do is make sure that the file name makes sense. So make sure, rename things if you need to. Make sure that there is good alt tag there. And then preferably to make sure that the actual sizes indicated in the image itself are, first of all, there, because these are optional attributes. You don't have to specify size and width, height and width. Make sure they're there and make sure they're exactly what they should be, not something different. So with that, I think we wanted to, I want to talk about some other stuff later. David, go ahead, whatever you were going to do next.
Okay, so essentially, what has changed in terms of the images themselves is that the images that you actually put on your website these days have to tell almost a mini version of the story that actually putting in place, and they have to work on their own. And in the past, we didn't really have to do that. Google's image search is a very powerful traffic driver to websites. People do a lot of searches for different images. They look at things. If you have an eye-catching image, that tends to catch their attention, and they usually follow through to the page itself that has that image. And this is one of the ways that we create what we call usually serendipitous breadcrumb trails that bring people to our website. So think very carefully. Do the images that I put now on my website fulfill that role? Can they stand on their own entirely? If they stand on their own and we have perhaps 10 images in a row from 10 different parts of the website, are they identifiable as coming from the same website, or it just happen to be just 10 images that we threw together? So it all becomes part of the branding signature, if you like, going back to my Coca-Cola advert of Coca-Cola mentioned before. And again, it's the kind of thinking that needs to be put in place. You know, 4 or 5 years ago, we could have gotten away with just any kind of image. These days, what we call corporate thinking has to take place in terms of having an overall signature, an overall approach, the kind of thing that actually makes sense long term and simplifies life in the short term. So a lot of thinking has to happen beforehand, before any kind of action is actually taken.
Yeah, one more thing I wanted to mention. We do have a question for Gina, which we'll answer in a minute. But one thing I wanted to mention is, do not confuse the concept of layout of your imagery or your website with individual images, because those are two totally different things. The layout of your actual pages, the way it looks, you know, the way the layout, like you would lay out a magazine, basically. The layout is certainly dependent on the imagery, no question about that. But that's a very different thing than just simply trying to find a photo to go with your post. I mean, it's a very different way of looking at it, different way to approach it. And so if you don't know how to do graphics well, and you don't know how to design layouts, you know, graphically speaking, like a graphic designer, definitely try to get some help from somebody who does. Because based on personal experience, you're not going to create something that's good if you don't know how to do this right. And so you want to get some help from somebody. With that said, once you get the layout in place and the way the look and feel of the website, like David was talking about, you know, some of these corporate websites, what they do and how they do it, then when you're creating new blog entries, you certainly want to keep the same feel in terms of the site. So if you have mostly pastel colors, you have mostly kind of really light images to go in each post, continue to do that. But you can certainly, you know, create or get your own images. You don't need any professional help beyond that. But the basic layout of the website and stuff should be done by somebody who knows what they're doing, if you want it to be attractive and you want it to look good, because that's, you know, very, very important in terms of how people perceive your whole site. But that's, like I said, that's different than you making blog posts or making social media posts where you simply attach an image, because then the layout is, if you're putting an image in Google+, it's their layout, it's not your layout. And of course, you are going to put your own images. So just want to make sure there's distinction between these two. And before we jump into specific different formats and things like that, which is kind of what I wanted to talk about next, if David doesn't mind, Gina was asking a question. With alt tags, do you feel it's important to describe what's in the picture, or is it better to describe the topic of the page that it's placed on? David?
Well, that's an interesting one. Well, the conventional thinking used to be that the picture was a corroborative element of something else. So usually it described the topic of the page that it was on. We are not in the same spot anymore, in the same place. We've moved on in terms of how precise image recognition is in Google. Machine learning is constantly improving on this front. As I said earlier, pictures are being taken apart. They're looked at in terms of their context, in terms of the individual entities within them, and the importance that each entity is actually given in the picture. So it makes more sense these days to actually describe a picture as fully as possible, because in terms of search engine optimization values, the picture itself and how it's deconstructed becomes a very important part of the entire SEO effort.
Sorry about this.
It's your birthday, yes.
Go ahead.
So essentially, Gina, to answer your question, these days, every picture that's actually added to a website has to be, an SEO point of view, deconstructed into layers, and those layers need to be reflective then of the naming process, of the naming protocols, of the description protocols, and so on. And obviously the choice of the picture.
Yeah, I think to me, I look at it from a standpoint of SEO. If you remember in the old days, people used to, dump tons of the same words on a page to make it appear in the search engine. Obviously, we're way past those days, but you can use the same concept, the idea behind it, because they were using the page's text to index the page in these alt tags. Because if it's a picture of tomato and you simply put tomato in the alt tag, yes, it's a tomato, but if you're not trying to get Google to index the word tomato and get you placed somewhere based on the word tomato, then to me you're wasting an alt tag because you're not accomplishing anything SEO related. You're just simply identifying that it's a tomato. If they don't see a picture, they'll see text. And so I think the way you look at it is there any value for you or value for your audience when they look at that thing and it says tomato, versus is there value to Google search robot crawling it and indexing it and potentially putting you in a higher spot based on the keywords you indicated that have nothing to do with tomato potentially. I mean, tomato is there, but you're trying to make posts about cooking different things. You're not trying to get indexed by tomato. You want to try to get indexed by cooking Italian pasta, for example, or something like that, or Italian sauce. So, David, that's my feeling. I don't know, what do you think about that, about using alt tags much more, about use that as an SEO builder versus simply, describing what the picture has in it?
Well, essentially, these days, this is what has really changed. Search engine indexing is driven by machine learning. Machine learning is essentially a form of AI. And search itself has changed. Semantic search is a very complex kind of programming that can be adjusted on the fly and constantly changes. And the direction it is leading us towards is a never increasing granularity. That granularity, that attention to detail, that kind of building block approach that Oleg just mentioned, that kind of joining all the dots on a specific page to make it stand out from a gazillion other pages which are very similar, then that has to happen in a very intent-driven way. And there are no shortcuts anymore. So essentially, you have to have a very clear approach. And the only shortcut that I usually advise anybody to put in place is to do the original thinking, the hard thinking that needs to happen beforehand in terms of how does my brand values drive my visual presence, for example? How does my core values or the identity of my business drive the kind of content I need to create? Once you have answered those, that becomes your easy, within inverted commas, approach to creating both written and visual content. And then that creates a consistency, which leads to a style, which leads to a particular type of identity building on the web. And that's what actually allows search to say, hey, your business may be similar to 1,000 other businesses, but it's actually pretty unique in the way you do it. And we can see why it's unique, because you do these things in a specific way. And you're joining all the dots and you're allowing us to understand it better than anybody else. So then suddenly your business on the web becomes more visible. And this is the entire point of SEO. It's not to give you any kind of shortcut, because these days it doesn't, but it's to enable you to understand how to increase visibility, how to help people find you easier, or more easily, certainly. So the only way to do it is by actually doing the kind of granular approach which needs to be driven by your understanding of what your business does and how you then need to present that in a digital context visually.
Yes. Okay. I don't have any other questions right now, so I think what I'm going to do is jump into the little presentation I put together to just kind of go over various formats. If that's okay, David?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, go ahead.
And let me see if I can bring it up here. 1 second. So essentially, what I'm going to show you is I put together this my logo as one example. Let me just bring up the thing so you can actually see it. So I use my logo in the example here, and also I use the regular image so you can kind of see both. And let me make sure that you can see it. And so, logo looks like a logo. And so you can see if you set this up as a GIF image. And so let's talk about that, because we didn't, for those who don't know. On the web, there's only a certain number of graphical formats that you can actually use for images. One of them is, GIF, as it's called, or some people call it GIF. One of them is JPEG, and one of them is PNG. So those are three formats. Lately, also some browsers, including Chrome, support SVG, which is the vector graphic format. And that's kind of the latest big deal, because you can do a lot of really cool things with SVG. And so we'll talk a little bit about that. But the main things that everybody uses, the vast majority of stuff out there, is either GIF or PNG or JPEG, with probably JPEG having the lion's share, GIF being behind that, and PNG being the last one. And so I wanted to briefly talk about why you would want to use each one, and why you wouldn't want to use some of them. So this is an example. It's a logo. You can still see, you can still get by with two colors. It's pretty large size, so shouldn't be a big deal with aliasing and stuff. So even with two logos, you can create something that looks acceptable. And as you can see, it's only 7K in terms of how much space it eats up on disk, meaning how fast it's going to load. The smaller the file size, the faster it's going to load. If we move on to the next slide, we crank it up exactly the same image to 16 colors. Now we went to 13K. So just as you can see visually on the right side, the logo itself looks identical to you on the screen. I mean, most people would not, without taking a magnifying glass and looking really closely, you can't really tell the difference between that particular 2-color image and 16-color image, because there are only 2 colors, blue and white. But if you save it as a 16-color image, you can see the size doubles. We went from 7K to 13K, okay? So the size practically doubles. If you go to 256 colors, which is, obviously a lot more capabilities, even though, again, we're not incorporating any new colors here. It's still 2-color image. We get to 18K. So as you can see, if you save stuff in the wrong number of colors, the wrong format, then you will pay for it potentially with loading time. And if you're talking about a website that has hundreds or maybe thousands of images, it makes a huge difference in loading times. And of course, Google is not going to like it. And people have been even saying that they're penalizing, actually, some websites for taking too long to load. And as much as I love the eye candy stuff, as much as I love images and everything else, animations, movement, all of this needs to be loaded. All of this takes time. So you need to be very careful about the balance between the two. How much eye candy do you want to present? Does this eye candy really justify longer loading times and potentially being lower placed on Google search engine as a result? We look at the next one. It's the same exact logo at JPEG at 50% compression, because JPEGs are what they call, GIFs are lossless. I mean, you can make an image in whatever color you take as GIF, and it's going to be exactly, as long as you're within the number of colors that you're saving it, it's not going to lose any quality. The JPEGs are, it's the kind of format that is what they call lossy, meaning you do lose some quality. Even if you go at 99% compression, you're still going to lose some quality. But most of that quality is almost invisible to the human eye. So you need to be, when you get really, really low, and like in this particular case, it's not a great example, but you can see some noise there in the picture if you look carefully, because it's 50% compressed. So as you can see also, the point I'm trying to make here is that we went from a 7K size that looked really good to slightly dirty looking JPEG, which is 23K. So we're actually 3 times more in size here, and the image quality is much, much worse. The moral here is, do not just go and save everything as JPEGs because your brother told you, or because that's the way everybody else does. It's not the case. You really need to look at each image and figure out what makes the most sense. And if you need to save it as a few different formats and see, do that. But it does take some time. Once you get used to doing it, you pretty much know what to do in terms of these sizes, in terms of these compressions. But as you can see, this would be much better a GIF image than it would be a JPEG, even though it's 50% compressed. Okay, so if we go to 80% compression, it jumps up to 33K in size, and of course looks a little bit cleaner. And if you go to 90% compression, it jumps up to 42K in size. So it went from 7K looking good to 42K still looking good using JPEG. Okay, so it's 6 times the difference in size, even though the quality is pretty much identical, except it's actually a little bit better in the 7K file, because that doesn't lose any quality, and JPEG is a lossy format that does. So again, the point I want to reiterate is, don't just save things as JPEGs or GIFs, whatever. You need to really look at the situation. The normal suggestion would be is if you have something that has fairly small number of colors, such as logos, such as clip art, things like that, usually it's best to save them as GIFs or GIFs, okay, because it's going to be smaller size. If you have something that has imagery or a lot of different variation in colors, then JPEG would be better compressed, and you just need to see how much compression you can give it to make it look good. Most of the time, I would recommend compressing to about 85%. If you go to about 80 to 85%, you're virtually going to see no degradation visibly in quality of the image, because we are talking about the web here, which inherently doesn't have high resolution. If we were talking about print media, it'd be a totally different story. I mean, they would look horrible if you take these same images and drop them into a print publication. But on the web, it's going to look just fine. You just need to see how much you can compress it to, and you have to actually see by trying it, and it's a trial and error thing. You won't be able to tell otherwise, because each image is going to be different. If you look at PNG format, you can see that PNG format in full color, 24-bit, meaning 60 million colors, you're going to have its size 28K. So the quality is good, but you're going to have it, much bigger. It went from 7K to 28K. Now, when would you use this versus using, let's say, JPEG, for example? The reason you'd use PNG if you were going to use this format is if you need transparency and you need good quality. In other words, GIFs is the kind of format that allows you to have transparency, meaning you can actually put this logo over any background, and the only thing will be visible is the logo. It's not going to conceal anything else, meaning that certain color in that image is what they call transparent. So right here in this logo here that I have, you can see I'm putting on a white background, but part of the logo has these white lines, and that's transparent. If I drop this logo over any other image, it would still look exactly like it is, and whatever is white would become whatever that image is. You just kind of think of it as a stencil. That's the easiest way to describe it, is basically having a stencil. And PNG allows you to do it, GIF allows you to do it, but not JPEG. You cannot have transparency in JPEG images, so that's another consideration to keep in mind. If you're trying to drop a logo, usually stick to either GIF or PNG, and if you need it to be of really high quality in terms of number of colors, GIFs can only go up to 256 colors. So if you need something that has a lot more color than that, you have to go with PNG. Okay, and that's the basic rule. And moving on to the next here, 256 colors image is 19K, and if we go to SVG, as you can see, the Google Slides can't even display SVG right now, but the browser, the Chrome itself will. And that image looks exactly the same, and it's only 4K. So as you can see, like I said before, if you're trying to get images that have fairly small amount of graphical information in them, not pictures, in other words, not photos, then SVG is a killer format, because you can see it's the smallest. I mean, it's the same size image in terms of height and width, and yet it's only 4K. The best we got with GIF when we started was 7K, which was double this practically. Okay, so it definitely makes sense to look at SVG when it comes to logos, when it comes to clip art, when it comes to things that don't have a lot of color in them. If you look at image, like a photo, like this is one of my photos, you can see that the original JPEG, 676 pixels wide by 901 pixels high, is 3.4 megabytes. I mean, it's big. Okay, it's 3.4 megabytes. If you go to the next slide, if you compress it just 10% from the original, and you compress it using JPEG, you can see it goes down from 3.5 or whatever, 3.3 megabytes down to 250K. So it's like 10 times smaller by just compressing it 10%. I'll bet you anything, if you jump, I'm going to go back to the previous image, carefully look at the image on the screen, and then I'm going to jump to the next one. It's impossible to see with the human eye. I mean, I can't see the difference. David, can you see the difference?
No, I can't actually. I think
yeah, it's
really
the same, right?
Yep,
and we
yep.
went from an image that was 3.5 megabytes down to 250K. So that's, again, I want to reiterate the same point. What format you're using for saving your pictures and what parameters you're using, such as compression, things like that, make a huge difference in the final size, which of course makes a huge difference to how quickly your website will load. If we go to 50%, you know, I'm sure if you really carefully look, you could probably see a difference. I'm going to jump back and then jump forward again. You can see virtually, you just can't see the difference. If you look at the image, it's like the image doesn't change at all. And that's because even at 50%, some of these things still look really good. And you can see we got the image down to 114K size now using JPEG. Okay, if we go to the next one, SVG, it's 157K, which is also pretty low. I mean, that's really nice. Even for that, it did a pretty good job. But you'll find a lot of times when you're doing kind of elaborate photography, SVG sometimes can actually increase the image size instead of decreasing it. So it all depends on what kind of image it is, and you'll have to try it to see what goes on with that. With that, I think that's really what I wanted to say about the images and different sizes and stuff. So again, just to quickly recap thing, if you're trying to do images with relatively few colors, stick with either GIF or PNG. If you need to have transparency, so some of the stuff winds up being transparent like a stencil, you have to use either GIF or PNG. You don't have any choice. If it's fairly few colors, go with GIF. If it's fairly large number of colors, go with PNG. That would be the suggestion. If you need to do images with tremendous amount of detail, such as regular photos of, you know, landscapes or people or things like that, where you really need to have a lot of tone colors so people don't look like they have red blotches on their face or things like that, you want to have a nice, you know, smooth tone, which means you need to have a lot of gradation of colors. Go with JPEG, compress it down to maybe like, you know, 90 or maybe 80%. It's still going to look excellent, but it's going to really get the size down there. And then with vector graphics, you'll have to try it. Just keep in mind that not everything supports vector graphics. So you can drop it into Chrome. It'll show just fine potentially. But then if you're talking about putting in Google Slides, as you can see, Google Slides doesn't support that format right now. So you can't, if you drop it in there, it's not going to be able to show it to you. So with that, I think I'm done with my part. David, please, if you have something else to add.
Yeah, just wrapping up. Essentially, it just comes down to having a very clear idea of your strategy. You need to have a strategy for pictorial content. You need to have perhaps templates for your website where you drop stuff in. You need to have a clear understanding of the format if you're going to use format. You need to know your limitations. You can't be all things to all men, and you can't constantly keep fighting yourself. If you can't do something well enough, find the next best thing you can do and actually work at it, and, you know, make it part of your gradual growth. So, you know, what you must never do is take the easy option out and just drop an image because an image needs to be dropped. You need to tick the box that says an image needs to go here. So make sure that image really works for you. It works independently of your article and written content to actually help your website and brand be found pictorially, and you'll find yourself winning the online visibility game.
Excellent. Let me just quickly check to see if we have any last questions for David. And okay, Gina says, need to know your limitations. That's a very important point, David. I don't know if she's trying to, no, I'm just kidding. Okay, so with that, that's not a question. We'll ignore this one for now. David, thank you very much. Always a pleasure to talk to you about all these things.
And happy birthday. Since it's your birthday, we all need to say this.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. And till next time, I think we're done with images for today. And if you have any questions, please leave them in the Google space for this particular HOA. Until next time, take care.
Bye-bye.